Hello and welcome to Always Bored, Never Boring. Something I have been fairly vocal about since Avalon Hill relaunched the HeroQuest brand was the introduction of Abominations. I did not like them. I thought they looked daft, the miniatures were awkward with harpoons that got in the way, and I felt giant fishmen weren't the best fit for the adventures our heroes were going on. After all, none of the official quests involve a trip to Innsmouth. And I will confess, one of the reasons I didn't like Abominations was because they replaced a childhood favourite, what I have always called the Fimir, but which is probably more accurately the Fimir. The Fimir are a very cool race, entirely created by Games Workshop's own design team, and tragically doomed by a series of poor choices and outright blunders. According to Games Workshop alumni Graeme Davis, the story goes that company owner Brian Ansell had created a new race of creatures that would be distinctive to Warhammer and which he intended to include in the Warhammer Fantasy role-playing game. The creatures that Ansell created were the Zoats, which he intended to pronounce Zoats. The rest of the team were not too impressed, and Ansell told them that if they didn't want Zoats, they had to come up with something else. As such, Graeme set to work alongside Jess Goodwin and Tony Ackland, creating something new, something better than Zoats. They took inspiration from Celtic mythology, in particular legends of the Irish Fomorians. Graeme came up with the culture and stats, Tony worked on the visuals, and Jess designed the original prototype miniature. What they created were the Fimir. The name was simply a truncation of the name Fomorian, with the O's changed to I's, and the overall appearance was lifted almost entirely from an Alan Lee illustration that appeared on the back cover of a book by Michael Scott called Irish Folk and Fairy Tales Volume 2. Fimir were large lizard-like humanoids that lived in swamps. They hated sunlight and shrouded themselves in magical mist as a form of protection. They lived in a matriarchal society under the control of female mages, and they were innately magical. Jess Goodwin sculpted a prototype miniature around 1985, and Fimir subsequently appeared in the first edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay in 1986. Funnily enough, the Zoats appeared too. However, neither proved too popular, and there are two prevailing explanations for why Fimir didn't catch on as Games Workshop would have liked. Jess Goodwin's original Fimir sculpt was being sold as a limited edition piece at least as late as 1987, appearing in the mail order section of White Dwarf 86 from February of that year. But Jess's Fimir was roughly the size of an orc, with stats to match. It fitted on a 25mm square base. These were the Fimir that Games Workshop were keen to push, and according to Stephen Baker, when he designed HeroQuest as part of the collaboration with MB Games and Games Workshop, it was Games Workshop who were pushing to include Fimir in the roster of enemies. Hence, the most memorable dungeon crawler of all time got one of the most memorable villains. But to be honest, the thing that appeared in HeroQuest was a Fimir in name and appearance only. It retained none of the lore that Graeme had devised. In fact, the creature biography in the HeroQuest rules could have been for a completely different race. It said, "These one-eyed lizard-like creatures are stronger even than orcs. They are sometimes found leading small bands of orcs and goblins, but are dangerous enough even when encountered singly." Interestingly, the Fimir never appeared on the HeroQuest cover art. I don't know if this was because they were a late addition to the game after Les Edwards had completed the artwork, or because they were deemed too unusual for the cover. Nevertheless, they did have a chance to shine on the cover of the Advanced HeroQuest box, which was published later the same year. So, an attempt was made, but something went awry. Duties for expanding the line of miniatures fell to sculptor Nick Bibby, and due to a communications error, he believed Fimir was supposed to be the size of ogres rather than orcs. His Fimir were launched in 1988, presumably after their inclusion in HeroQuest was finalised. They were hulking brutes in metal, weighing a ton, and they had a price tag to reflect that. This was a disaster from a fantasy battle perspective. Nobody could afford to buy ogre-sized units at ogre-sized prices that died like orcs. Funnily enough, by the time Advanced HeroQuest was published, the miniature used for the Fimir's monster reference sheet was one of Bibby's and stood on a large base, but the special rules omitted any mention of the Fimir being large. When the Advanced HeroQuest expansion Terror in the Dark came out in 1991, a note was included to say that Fimir should be classed as large, and they therefore took up 4 spaces on the game board. Sizing aside, there was a secondary reason why Fimir may have been quietly brushed under the carpet. Their original lore is questionable. Graeme Davis regrets it, but he drew heavily, perhaps too heavily, on folklore. In particular, the legends of the Cunnel Trow of the Northern Isles. He created the Fimir as a race that procreated by kidnapping human women. Lore can be changed, rewritten completely, but that is perhaps too dark a stain on the history of these creatures. Eventually, Fimir faded into obscurity, but they weren't completely eradicated from the Book of Grudges. Many fans remember them fondly, and they even made an appearance as Norska monstrous infantry in Total War Warhammer. But the chances of them ever making a real comeback are slim to none. Personally, I can look past the questionable lore and appreciate the Fimir as, well, what I first understood them to be playing HeroQuest as a 10-year-old. Cool cyclopean monsters. They have a striking appearance that I have always enjoyed, and I do use them in Advanced HeroQuest. But I only have my trusty plastic HeroQuest ones, so I have to roll out the runts of the litter. I would love some of the Bibby sculpts. Naturally, I need the one depicted in Advanced HeroQuest for my Advanced HeroQuest project, and it would be great to have that limited edition Jess Goodwin sculpt. But the prices are astronomical at the moment and aren't likely to get any better anytime soon. I'm playing a waiting game there, hoping a bargain crops up eventually, or that big lottery win finally comes in. And so, yes, when Avalon Hill eventually rebooted HeroQuest, I missed the Fimir. Of course, I understood that Fimir couldn't be part of the equation. Avalon Hill was stripping out all of the Games Workshop IP, and Fimir were one of the most definitive and easily identifiable elements that was absolutely 100% their property. So they had to go. Honestly, even if Avalon Hill were working in collaboration with Games Workshop, I still can't see that Fimir ever would have been an option. A substitute was always going to be on the cards. But the Abominations were not what I was expecting. Aside from the fact I wasn't fond of the sculpt, they seemed out of place. And while there is an argument that fishy folk could be considered in some way similar to swamp-dwelling lizard folk, it still felt too far removed from what the Fimir initially were and represented. I guess I always imagined them bossing the orcs and goblins around, while the Abominations look more like monstrous freaks that the goblins goad into action with pointy sticks. The one thing I did think Avalon Hill got right was the size. The Abominations felt large and imposing enough to be threatening. However, over time, it's fair to say my stance has softened, and there are numerous reasons for that. Firstly, I don't think I gave Avalon Hill enough credit for their choice. The more I thought about it, the more I realised that the Abominations were probably created in homage to a beautiful piece of Les Edwards art, the front cover of Return of the Witchlord. Just look at that little fella there. Okay, he's more demonic than fishy, but he has some of the same energy, and while he may be in a prison cell, he could be clawing his way out of a sewer grate. I'm prepared to accept there could have been some influence there. Secondly, I think I was considering the Abominations within the constraints of the original adventures. As Avalon Hill have produced new scenario packs, I do think we have had more occasions where fishy folk are a more suitable inclusion. I'm thinking in particular of the waterlogged missions in Spirit Queen's Torment and the swamp in Joe Manganiello's The Crypt of Perpetual Darkness, which I only recently reviewed on the channel. Of course, we also have the sewer grate tiles. These have only very rarely appeared in official quests, but it is an evocative idea to have these amphibian fiends clambering out of these grates. Finally, when Spirit Queen's Torment and Prophecy of Telor went to retail, they included alternative Abomination sculpts. Admittedly, they were sculpts in translucent plastic, but nevertheless, I felt they were much better. Here is one I painted up. It is in fact the only modern HeroQuest miniature I have painted. Overall, I just prefer the stance. It doesn't have the harpoon, which sort of got in the way on the original sculpt and in my mind at least, looked a bit silly. This one looks more threatening and less, less funny fishman. So, while Abominations are never going to replace Fimir in my wizened old sepia-toned heart, I have warmed up to them somewhat. I actually would quite like a quest pack that revolves around them, with a few more sculpts, maybe a big boss. It would be a good opportunity to flesh out this race and let us know more about them. A quest in a marsh or even an overrun port town could be neat. But let me know in the comments if there is anything about HeroQuest that you have changed your opinion on over time, because that is it from me for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please consider pressing the like button. If you really like this video, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so, and hopefully I will see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye.